Today we are going to be discussing John Mayer's amp rig for the Sphere shows with Dead and Company. A few kind of interesting details that are going along with just the rig in general that John's been using for the Sphere shows, but the amp rig is probably the coolest, so we're going to dive into that in today's video first before we discuss kind of some of the other details that are going on with his rig. So as far as the amps are concerned, the Sphere is a very interesting venue because you tend to not get a lot of really good stage shots, even from posts from Dead and Company, the band. They're not even posting really any great stage shots. It's more just all the visuals you see so much of. But getting a few really great shots here of John's amp rig to go over, so I apologize that there's not a ton of great shots that we have to look at today, but this is the best we have so far. So when the Sphere show started, we had a couple of things going on that you could pretty much have expected when it came to John's amps, and then a little bit of some changes and something new for John as well, which always makes things a little bit more exciting than just seeing the same old amp rig being used, year after year, tour after tour. So the very first amp in the rig is one that we've seen John using just a ton lately, especially over the past couple of years, and it's the Carlos Santana owned Dumble Overdrive Special 50 watt, the silver face one. That one we've seen John using with Dead and Company quite a lot, and on the solo tour as well. It was one of the main amps John used throughout the entire solo tour, essentially. So this ODS is one that it was a very good shout of it appearing on the tour for the Sphere shows, at least for this kind of residency that the band is doing. And that's the very first amp that we saw John using, and that was like, okay, that's kind of a given. So pretty cool to see that amplifier returning. One of John's kind of favorite amps, I think, right now, to be honest. He's been using it so much lately. Now, the Fender amp that kind of sits in the middle of the amp rig, initially when shots first came out, it kind of looked like it was a vibroverb. That's kind of what we saw. It was like, okay, just a smaller, well, not smaller, but just a Fender combo amp that was seated on the stage. It was kind of like, all right, most likely it's the vibroverb. And kind of initial thoughts were, is John essentially using the solo tour rig for the Sphere residency as well? But then we got some better shots of the amp rig, and you could tell that, okay, this wasn't a vibroverb, it was actually a twin reverb, a kind of, 60s era twin reverb, which is very interesting because the wattage of the twin reverb compared to something like a vibroverb, for example, it's quite a big difference. You're looking at about 85 watts, I believe the twin reverbs are, so a lot more power on tap than something like a vintage vibroverb would have. So just a bit of a change up for John, but sticking with that kind of classic, traditional blackface Fender sound, more or less, but this time just going for the twin reverb. Then for the first few shows, at least, there was that kind of same amplifier behind a curtain thing that we'd seen John using before with Dead and Company. Now, the theory that this amp is a Dumble small special, it's kind of this uber rare Dumble amplifier that essentially is a 100 watt overdrive special, but without the overdrive part of the amplifier. So just a big, clean amplifier, and that's what we theorized John was using, at least initially when we first saw the amp behind the curtain. Obviously, we have no idea if he's changed that amplifier or things, whatever's going on there. It's just a hunch. But it's a pretty good hunch at that is what he's actually using. But, very cheeky, obviously, John using an amp with a curtain over it to kind of cover it up, or at least kind of make us really have to guess what he's using instead of just throwing it backstage, miking it up backstage. Nope, I'm going to put a curtain over it and put it on stage. So that was pretty cool to see, and that was kind of the three amplifiers that John was using initially for the Sphere shows, at least. Then what ended up happening was there was this black kind of Fender Bandmaster shaped amplifier that you'd see actually placed beside the amps on its side. Kind of weird. And there was actually a cable going into it. You could tell it was actually, as far as we could tell at least, being used, which was really weird. And then a few shows later, that kind of Dumble small special that we theorized, at least that's what John was using, got replaced by this amplifier. And you got a really good look at it this time around, so you could confirm a couple of things. Number one is that it's Bandmaster shaped. I have a blackface Bandmaster here, and it's, the kind of the exact same shape, but it's all black. The Tolex, the grill cloth, everything is blacked out essentially on this amp. The knobs are kind of those Dumble knobs on it. There's no actual like Fender Bandmaster wording, nothing for the actual kind of front face of the amplifier. It's got a green pilot light, and then instead of Fender across the grill cloth for the logo, it says Ultra Phoenix. So is this a Dumble Ultra Phoenix modded Bandmaster? We have no idea. It's kind of weird. And the amplifier, it's definitely not the best looking amplifier I've ever seen. It looks just strange. Now, I don't know if Dumble ever really modified the aesthetics of amplifiers before. That's kind of one thing that crossed my mind was like, okay, like is this one really weird kind of amplifier that Dumble changed the circuitry, modded the Bandmaster to the Ultra Phoenix mod, and then went crazy with the aesthetics of it, or did someone do that after the fact? We don't know, and this is just a hunch. Kind of seems a little bit weird to have the amplifier looking like this with no logo on it and just says Ultra Phoenix on it, but that's kind of the best shout as to what this is, at least. Maybe a Dumble modded Bandmaster. You know, I've personally never seen an amp look remotely like this. As far as I've been able to tell, all of the kind of Dumble Fender amplifiers have always kept the Fender aesthetic, and he's never changed it. So who knows if this is just one of those weird things that someone bought a Ultra Phoenix modded Bandmaster from Dumble and then decided to have someone to go in after the fact and customize the actual exterior of the amp. I think that might be likely, and then maybe John stumbled upon it, or someone who knows John was like, hey, I got this kind of really weird amp, but the guts, the actual sound that you're going to get out of it is whole phenomenal. It's a little bit weird looking, but hey, trust me, the sound is incredible. You got to check it out. And then maybe John played it and really, really liked it. And now here we are seeing this thing at the Sphere. It's incredibly unique. That's for sure, you know, with the Dumble knobs, the Ultra Phoenix instead of the word Fender going across it, the all kind of blacked out scheme. It's very interesting. The cable on that one, too, you can tell for both the Ultra Phoenix Bandmaster, let's just call it that for now until we, have any better updates. The cable for that one and on the Twin are both going into the vibrato channels as well, the very first input, in case you guys are kind of wondering there. So that's what's kind of going on for the Fender flavor of the amplifiers. Now, on top of that Fender Twin is a Soldano Space Box, which is essentially just a big spring reverb kind of box that John's been using with the amps. This isn't the first time either we've seen John using a kind of external spring reverb or reverb kind of type thing, especially with Dead & Company on top of a Fender amplifier. The kind of quintessential version of this that I always think of is back when John was using two JMod PRS 100, his signature PRS amps, using one on either side, and then he'd have the dual professional, and then he would have the Victoria Reverberato right on top of the amp rig as well. So kind of a similar aesthetic and thing that we've seen before with Dead & Company. That's just where my association with seeing something like this goes. So that's really cool. This Soldano Space Box, from what I can tell, is already something pretty rare, very hard to get. So if you want to pick one up, good luck is all I will say. Now, I've personally left talking about the speakers, the cabinets that you see on stage and stuff like that, and you might have been able to already tell and kind of know why I'm not talking about this stuff. It's because if you look at any shots of the stage or any footage, none of the amplifiers are mic'd up. There's no mics on stage at all. So initially, the theory, and it's kind of like the same thing, like U2, I believe, is the only other band that's actually played at the Sphere so far, at least or done like a residency. The Edge was using all those universal audio pedals for amps because just the way the Sphere is designed, you don't really want to have stage volume from what I understand. So he went and used those universal audio pedals instead of, his different amplifiers that he'd normally use. But then as well with John, none of his amplifiers are mic'd up. So the theory is that he's obviously, we assume he's using at least the amplifiers that are on stage, especially that 50 watt ODS. It's kind of his favorite amplifier. If he was going to use it and have maybe amps off stage and have just amps on the stage for show, he'd probably just use a couple Fenders or something and just be done with it, not go through the hassle of putting a few Dumbles on stage or whatever is going on. So the amplifiers were most likely being fed off stage, underneath, or wherever they do it in the Sphere and kind of have the external cabs to be mic'd. That was probably what was going on. And something else that kind of ties into all of this is previously with Dead & Company, John had actually switched to using larger over-the-ear headphones because the stage volume was so loud. He was having a lot of ringing in his ears, and he was actually preferring going from traditional in-ears to those bigger over-the-ear headphones just to protect his hearing and also kind of hear the band better and be more in the moment, was kind of what John was saying. But for the Sphere, we saw him switch back to the traditional in-ears. So it was kind of like, all right, the amps, they're not being mic'd up on stage. And then as well, John's going back to using in-ears. And then on the Comes a Time podcast with Oteil and Mike, they actually talk about the kind of gear setup at the Sphere and kind of how everything works. And Oteil mentions that the amps on stage are silent. So there's no actual sound coming out of them at all.
It's kind of like, if you want to play in this room, here's a couple things you need to do that may not be.
You got to contain all, like people were asking us about the amps. Those amps have nothing coming out of them. Zero.
Wow.
They're trying to contain all sound. So drums is the one thing you can't contain.
Right.
So they got to put plexiglass around it to just minimize as much as possible.
So pretty interesting to know that the cabs are purely there for show. There's no actual sound coming out of John's amps on stage. Literally, it's just there because they want to have something, kind of to hoist the at least heads on top of for the show. And then, of course, the twin just sits on itself. But everything, completely sound-wise even, is going to kind of backstage, underneath the stage, wherever. And that's kind of what you're hearing being mic'd up, then going to front of house and kind of out to the audience. So they're completely silent on stage. So that's kind of cool as well. Something to note with John's amp rig here. We have no idea what speakers he's using, if there's any amps that are actually backstage that also are being thrown into the mix. You never know. There could be a Vibreverb or a Dumble land, something else being added in as well, or switching amps. We have no idea. I heavily theorize that what we see on stage is what you're actually hearing being fed backstage, but we can't say for 100% certainty if something else could be added into the mix, even for one show. You never know. But it's really cool. So there you guys have it. John's amp rig for the Sphere is pretty interesting with everything going on. Who knows if he's going to switch more amplifiers as well on stage. I really hope we learn more about the Ultra Phoenix Wanted Bandmaster or whatever that amplifier is. I would love to hear the story about that amplifier just because it looks so weird. I've never seen anything like it, and I just would love to know more of the history because I'm just genuinely curious. What the heck is up with that amplifier? If you've ever seen anything like that, obviously, let us all know in the comments down below, but yeah, it's weird. It's weird. It's a little kind of, out there in terms of its aesthetic. Maybe, if you actually are a fan of this aesthetic, I'd be curious to know in the comments too, if you guys like how this thing looks. I think, maybe just with Ultra Phoenix instead of Fender or add it underneath or something, then keep the original kind of color scheme would look a little bit better. But anyways, we're getting down a rabbit hole here of the color scheme. Yeah, this thing's weird. But hopefully that video today on the amp rig for the Sphere was helpful. Kind of, piqued your curiosity and kind of answer some questions you might have. But unfortunately, as of right now, it's not a whole heck of a lot that we know in terms of what's going on with John's amp rig. But pretty cool at least to kind of see it and discuss it thanks to some decent photos we finally got of the amp rig. So until the next time, you guys, thank you so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you on the next video.